Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show, and it's our final live stream of the season. We've made it to the season finale at Abu Dhabi. Rob, we look like we're dressed for business, so let's get down to it.
Yes, mate. Last one of the year. Cannot wait to rip into it. Hopefully, everyone's having a great morning, afternoon, wherever they are. But we're excited to get into the weeds of the last show of the season, the details of every single team construction we can make, and yeah, super pumped. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling really excited for this show because we have some really special guests coming on next. In about 5 minutes, we're going to have the number one and number three players in the world for the F1 fantasy game joining us live. We're going to ask them some questions about their readiness for this week and how they got here. And then we'll let them go, prepare for their lineup setting. Then we'll bring back Terry from F1 Coffee Corner to get some technical insight on this weekend. We have a few drivers that seem a bit out of place, so he'll tell us a bit about if we think they're going to recover. And then we'll come back and do our usual finale of revealing our lineups, picking a contest winner, and then we're going to stay on for 2 minutes later than usual because then at the top of the hour, Luke and Bruno will reveal their final lineups that'll determine the F1 Fantasy Championship this year. So it should be a great hour. All right, let's start digging into some of this data from FP3. It was a bit out of sorts here. I think when we bring on Terry, he'll agree with me that Mercedes was running different strategies because the Friday session was lost to the rookie drivers. So you see George Russell all the way at the top of the timing sheets, maybe a low fuel load, maybe Mercedes has unlocked some pace, but considering how far down Hamilton is, I think it was just a case of two different strategies, Rob.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, what's most interesting to me is that George Russell only ran 14 laps in that 60 minutes of practice. You got Lewis Hamilton down in P12, 26 laps. So, as you say, very different strategies. But I was expecting to a certain extent Mercedes to surprise a few of us. I don't expect them to be on the podium come the end of the weekend. But after what we've seen in Brazil, in Las Vegas, honestly, not a lot to instill faith in us, but at the same time, definitely think there's something in the tank for them to hopefully close out the year strong.
In a season where there's not much left to fight for, the Mercedes-Ferrari battle for P2 is probably the hottest thing we have left. On one end, you have Mercedes, who I think is just trying to warm up heading into the weekend. Meanwhile, Ferrari has had a bit of a mixed bag this weekend. Charles Leclerc's looked good throughout the sessions. Sainz had that big shunt in FP2. And then in FP3, they ran mediums for all but about 5 minutes. Then they did an outlap with the softs. Charles put up a good time, but then Carlos really struggled to get out of the bottom of the field. You could see him down here in P20. So we wonder then if Ferrari rebuilt the car after FP2, maybe didn't quite get the setup right. Maybe they're just playing it safe with Carlos to build him back up. But one of the top fantasy assets from Las Vegas is now all of a sudden on shakier ground than ever before.
Yeah, definitely. And particularly that shunt in practice as well leaves me with a few reservations around Carlos Sainz. Obviously, I think he's such a consistent asset of late. And you know, he has certainly delivered. He's had a number of really good performances since that DNS in Qatar, but at the same time, you just don't want that kind of issue heading into the last race of the season, where you want all your drivers, as we saw in Vegas, to finish the race. So I don't expect him to suddenly DNF on the first lap of the race, but at the same time, you just want that reassurance, that confidence. That I just don't think Sainz has provided so far.
The one last thing I noticed from FP3 was the performance of the Red Bulls. You can see Max in P6, Checo in P11. Max was pretty outspoken this weekend about how he was unhappy with the balance and the setup. So we could be in for a surprise. But also, though, if you look over at the qualifying sims, Red Bull are supposed to be at the top of the field. So I wonder if it could just be high fuel load, tuned down engine, maybe then just playing possum a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you look at the latest simulations on F1 fantasy tools, and they've got Checo in the top team, or in most of the top teams for that matter. So I think if he can string together the kind of performance we saw in Las Vegas, I know it's not the same circuit with as many straights, but there are through Sector 2 a couple of really good DRS straights. I think Red Bull can certainly feast, but I think for me, you know, I think we're going to talk a lot about this throughout the stream, but you know, McLaren perhaps were slept on a little bit heading into this weekend after the performance we saw from Ferrari, and you know, they are looking great in the first full practice session, the most uninterrupted practice session of the weekend. Norris and Piastri P2 and P3 respectively. So I mean, what's your take on that so far?
I'm really excited about McLaren this week. I think when you see my lineup, at least, and Rob, you're probably of a similar vein here. There's going to be a lot more McLaren presence than we saw last week. So it's just a matter of how we get them in. Are we willing to take a penalty to bring all three of them in, because we were on a Ferrari heavy team last week? So it'll be really interesting to see these last few lineup configurations. Speaking of lineups, I forgot to mention that if you have a lineup you want us to review, head over to the FanAmp app, drop a picture in there, and our producer will put it in a slide deck for me, and I'll share it live here on the screen. And while you're on the FanAmp app, answer our question this week: who will be the biggest surprise at Abu Dhabi? We're going to randomly select one winner at the top of the hour, and they'll win $50 to our sponsor, fifthgeargarms.com. And even though we have a really awesome code that you can use all year long, they have a pretty awesome Black Friday sale going on this weekend too.
I'm very curious to see, Adam, just before we rip into the next stanza of the show, you know, if your prediction on zero DNFs has changed after what we've seen in practice so far.
I'm staying with it because it's meant to be a bold prediction. They leveled, they ground down the track between turns 2 and turn 3 that sent off Sainz and Hülkenberg earlier, so I'm going to stick with it. No DNFs. That's my bold prediction.
Okay.
All right. So let's get into my favorite part of the show this week. We're going to bring on two of the top players in the world, Luke and Bruno. You can see Bruno is underneath me. Oh, there we go. Yeah. All right. So Bruno is coming to us from Brazil, and Luke is in the UK. Bruno's team, El Plano 123, is number 1 out of 2.4 million teams in the global league. Luke is number 3, and he's been at one of the top teams for several weeks. We've had him on the chat. He's answered a lot of your questions, so I'm really pumped to have both of you on. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Let's fire up a couple questions. So, Bruno, let's start with you. Has this run at the top of the fantasy rankings changed how you watch the race each week?
A little bit. Yeah. I got to say, in the beginning, I had my lineup there, but I was really just cheering for the drivers that I like, because I never thought, at least in the beginning of the year, in the first half, that I had a shot at going this deep, you know? But after pretty much half of the end of the season, when I was like in the top 1,000, I started like, just cheering more for my lineup rather than my favorite driver, which is Fernando Alonso.
Fantastic. Luke, how about you?
Yeah, it's definitely changed like how I watch it, because normally I'm cheering for drivers I like. Like, I've got a Lewis Hamilton hat here that my friend got for me, but I see myself even looking to the back of the grid for all the budget drivers that I've got, to cheering them on rather than looking towards the front. But also, for a driver that I really like Lewis, I've never thought I'd be happy to see him disqualified from a race. But after Kota and all the people who are chasing with the Limitless, I was pretty happy seeing that disqualification.
Oh, mate, having been in that exact situation, I as a Lewis Hamilton owner, I definitely can appreciate what your stance was after that race. But obviously you guys are both, you know, very high up the rankings, and a lot of people hopefully can take a few things away from this discussion. But as Bruno and Luke, will go to you afterwards, you know, going into the last week of the season, you know, you're obviously number 1 in the world at the moment. What are your thoughts with the potential that you could come away as the number 1 player in the world right now?
It's exciting. Really. It's not something I imagined that could happen. So it's something unexpected, but good, you know. Maybe I can attend one of the races next year with the prize for the number 1. And if not, it's fine too. It's just been fun to play, and it's fun just to be able to say I got this far, you know. So I had no expectations in the beginning, so it's all good stuff.
Yeah, exactly
awesome.
The same as Bruno. At the start, I didn't think of anything. My team's called Third Attempt, and the reason behind that is it's my 3rd year playing it. And the first 2 years, I was in the league with all my friends from university, and they know I've been watching F1 for a lot longer than them. And one person beat me 2 years in a row, which I wasn't happy about. So this year I took it a bit more seriously, and sort of, I think it's paid off. I was top a bit earlier in the season than Bruno. I think it was from, I can check here, it was from, where was it? It was after Italy, yeah, because I used the limitless there, and then I just stayed on top in Singapore. And I was chatting to you guys earlier and saying that I think it was Adam that tweeted that I had not had a DNF in 11 races, and then after that, cursed my lineup a bit, and I had quite a few DNFs, but I'm still up there, so you never know.
Great. And as we played the game last year versus this year, what do you think about this year's game versus last year's? And if there's one thing you could change about the game as we see it this year, what would it be?
I would say for myself, for me, the main thing was actually having the fantasy game on the app. That was a game changer, because it was I love the game and everything, but having to go on a separate browser tab every time to tweak the lineups and everything was not fun. So that was the main thing for me. But on the other hand, I think the extra chips are nice. I played last year for the first time, by the way. And in the first couple of races, I didn't even know the rules. So I was way far back in the rankings. I only figured out what was going on halfway through the year. And then this year, I kind of read through the rules in the beginning. I saw a couple of changes. But I think that the extra chips and having the actual game on the app, it's a game changer.
Bruno, is there anything you would want to see different for the 2024 game? Maybe things you missed from 2022 or things that were frustrating for you this year?
I think there are a couple things, right? So I think the budgets, the price of the drivers need to be adjusted better, right? Because we were stuck for pretty much 6 months, the first half, with Aston Martins, and after the first couple races, when you realize Aston Martin is the second best car, it should go to be the second most pricey car, and if they got worse, then they should go down. So I think that's how the prices should be adjusted, so that the game is more fun. We have more options. It's harder to get the best drivers possible in your lineup, and
I think you speak for a lot of us. That frustration the first few months of the season was really brutal, and it was somewhere around Canada where we really started seeing substantial price increases. But by then, we had a lot of people that dropped off the game. They said, "Well, I guess this is what it is. I might as well not play anymore." So I think they lost a lot of good fans just because they had no faith the game was going to take the corner. So it did take a while. Luke, how about you? What did you like about the game this year, and what's something you would change going into 2024?
I think Bruno got it spot on with the price estimations. I think after testing, they should have been a bit more on it with, realistically, I think everyone knew that Aston Martin were going to be quick. I think they should have put it a bit higher because, as Bruno said, everyone had a template team. It was double, so it was triple Aston, triple Red Bull, and Guan Yu Zhou. That was basically the template up until about, I think it was just before Silverstone. But also, I think you guys have touched on this on Twitter a lot. But the DNF system, I do think that some of the penalties for DNFs are a bit harsh. I didn't actually know myself until last race that if you complete the 90%, you don't get it. So when I saw that Yuki had retired, I thought, but then I realised me and Bruno had the same team anyway, so it didn't really matter. But it's slightly biased because I've had a good year, but I have enjoyed this year. But I do feel like the year was sort of saved by the fact that the McLaren resurgence a little bit. I feel like if they hadn't come back to where they are, it would be a bit of a long season.
You're definitely right.
The point about the DNF,
it's been a nice change of pace.
Yeah, the DNF point is so true. There are only 3 drivers that have averaged more than 20 points a race all season. So to make it a 20-point penalty, particularly for those back markers who are struggling with reliability, they're fighting through traffic, and they're more susceptible to accidents. It's a pretty brutal penalty to face. So I'm with you there too.
I have a question for you, Bruno. Obviously, you're at the top of the standings heading into the last week of the season of 2.4 million people. For those players that are in mini leagues, looking to preserve their position at the top of the leaderboard, is there any advice in particular that you'd provide to them? heading into the last week? Is there any strategies in particular you'd employ? Obviously, you've got a lead to protect, but Luke, for instance, is not that far behind you. So for someone watching this, what's your strategy there?
Yeah, it's definitely really close. I mean, I think 2 races ago, I went from, I think, 20th or something to first on the Brazilian Grand Prix. So it's like, yeah, I could go down way far back in one race. So yeah, it's going to be hard to keep it. I know it's very, very close. But I think my advice, without trying to give it up too much, would be to just go with your best team possible, right? The ones behind you are the ones that have to chase and maybe risk something. So go with your gut, whatever you think is best.
It's a simple formula, but it seems to work. I'd like to say, unless obviously DNFs play a factor.
It's interesting because Rob and I, in our head-to-head this year, I think I'm up 34 points on Rob. I have a very similar take to where Bruno's going. I could be a little bit more forthcoming with my team, but I think the goal, if you're out ahead in your league, is just put out the best team possible, play it safe. You don't feel like you have to go too crazy. Luke, let me ask you the question from Rob's perspective, as someone who's trying to make a comeback and chase, but also you don't want to do anything too crazy, because with each crazy pick that you put on your team, it decreases the likelihood that any of it will work. So what is your mindset heading into this week? Is it go crazy? Is it play safe and hope that you have that one driver that makes the difference?
Well, there's 2 sort of ways of going about it. You can either do, I can see some people in the chat saying 50 points behind in my league. You can do a full send. You can do any differential possible and just hope, like a lot of this game has been this year, sometimes luck comes into it. Or you can have a differential with a slight realistic shot. They might actually be up there rather than, as you called it, a Hail Mary. Another bit of advice is also you can study the budget of the people around you. So if you know what teams they can actually attain, and then if you know their budget that way, you can sort of get around it. And also a massive thing, I know we're in the last race, but some people do have chips left. And that was a massive thing in my season. I used my triple DRS all the way in Austria. And I genuinely thought I used it that early that people were going to catch that way. But a bit of luck, people use Limitless and go to it, etc. And here we are. So yeah, just study other people.
It's definitely been... Yeah, I fully agree with you there. It is, I mean, perhaps for someone for people like Adam and myself, and for you guys as well, it gets to a point where you're less concerned about your mini leagues and more focused on your overall rank. But it certainly has been a case this year of planning your chips throughout the season, because I think that has certainly dictated where a lot of us have kind of fallen out over the course of the season. You make a great point about Austria. A lot of people did very well in Monza as well with the Limitless there. And I think it has been, particularly interesting to plan those chips for certain weekends. But Adam and I obviously not so lucky in Austin, for instance, where we were burned by Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc.
Yeah, for me, the Limitless, it was a tale of 2 halves. The 3 sprints in the first half of the season, if you played the Limitless chip, the most expensive assets tended to work out. In the second half of the season, it was a mess. There were DNFs from Perez and Sainz in the first few. Then we had the DQ incident in Coda. So it was really just a matter of when you played it. And so those of you that used it in the first 3 sprints of the year, or one of the few weeks that Ferrari and Red Bull were at the top of a normal race weekend, you probably fared pretty well. We've got 2 minutes left, so maybe we can ad-lib a question, Rob. So the winner of the fantasy game this year gets to go to any race they want to in the world. Have either of you given a thought about where you'd want to go? Is it your respective home races, or do you want to see the world and visit a track you've never been to before?
I'll let Bruno go first.
Well, I've been the only race that I've ever been to is the one in Brazil. I currently live in the US, but when I was a kid, I went to the Brazilian Grand Prix. I think it was maybe 2010 and 2012. And so I'll definitely like to go somewhere different. And I think probably somewhere in Europe, which is more classic F1, I have a big affection for Spain. I like a lot of their athletes. I've met a lot of good friends from Spain. So maybe Barcelona would be one of the options.
I like that.
And Luke, what about you?
Well, I've been to Silverstone 3 times. I did 17, 18, 19. And it would be good to go to Silverstone, but I know that they don't actually include like the travel cost. So I think realistically, I think I would do Spa. I think I'd have to go to Belgium.
Hmm.
I think that's like a bucket list one, I think, for me.
It's a beautiful
Great
track,
pick.
and just bring a raincoat.
Yes, yeah, I've got a good raincoat. I live in London, so.
Fantastic. All right, we are right on schedule. We're going to let the two of you go because you have a lot of data to consume, some last checks you want to do to your team. But what we're going to do is bring Bruno and Luke back with just a few minutes left to the hour. We'll make some small talk with them. And then once lineups lock at the top of the hour, we're going to reveal those championship deciding teams. Bruno and Luke, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, gents.
All right, the special guests keep on rolling on our show today. Now we're going to bring in our new regular weekly guest, Terry from F1 Coffee Corner. Terry, good morning and good afternoon.
Yeah, I was going to say good afternoon for me. Good morning to you guys. How you doing?
I'm excited and nervous for today. I think that we've got two really wonderful players at the top of the global ranks duking it out for number one. I hope one of them gets it. And then I just hope I fend off Rob in our show league. So there's a lot to play for. And then plus my team Mercedes is trying to secure number two in the constructors. So a lot to play for today.
They are feeling the pressure today, that's for sure.
Terry, I've got a lot of questions for you based on what we've seen so far this weekend, because the table at the top of free practice hasn't looked the way we normally see it. And the top fantasy decision coming out of Las Vegas, where a lot of folks ran Ferrari, is do you stick with Ferrari or move to McLaren? The sims so far, and also what we saw in FP3, indicate that McLaren have really regained their form. What did you see this weekend, and do McLaren look like a safe play for us once again?
I think McLaren look like they're certainly back into the mix from what I'm seeing so far with what they're lapping and what they're doing. But I think that Ferrari, they're not showing their true pace still. I think that Carlos is clearly struggled with setup issues after his crash and obviously repairing that car. So there's something he's not quite right. But I do think there's a lot more to come still from the Ferrari. But I think McLaren are going to be strong. I think they're going to be stronger than what Ferrari is showing me at the moment from what I'm seeing.
That's a great point you make, because obviously Ferrari had an exceptional weekend in Vegas, and I think a lot of people understandably piled in on them after the results we saw in practice. But I do wonder, as you say, Terry, great result for McLaren so far. But if we're looking at someone like Lando Norris versus Carlos Sainz, is there, or even and I say Sergio Perez too in the mix there? Any particular driver of those three, or even George Russell, to throw him into the mix too, stand out to you?
Lando would be my best out of all those, to be honest. I think George, Adam touched on it earlier, I think Mercedes was running two very different strategies in terms of free practice free. You alluded to how many laps Lewis did. He was doing long runs on the soft tyre. Their degradation does look good, but I think also in terms of the overall pace and the race pace, I think McLaren are going to edge the Mercedes out still. So I think Ferrari are going to come back into it in qualifying in the race due just to the temperature of the track and how it's going to be done. But out of those, I would definitely go for Lando. I don't think Aston Martin show me enough that they're going to compete towards the top of those teams and such. I think they're going to be sort of fifth fastest in amongst it. So unless something happens, I don't think they're going to be in play for any serious points this weekend.
And just to zoom in on the Sainz point a little bit, he looked quite off in FP3 with that rebuilt Ferrari. He was all the way down at the bottom of the table. Do you have any sense of what could have gone wrong for him? And is it a further engine penalty out of the question?
I think it's out of the question. I don't think there's any penalties coming from what I can see. I think we're totally safe on that one now, unless obviously something happens in qualifying in terms of a complete smash. You wonder what parts have gone back onto the Ferrari. We obviously used a lot of parts last week in Vegas fixing it. They've used a lot of parts again. So with the short turnaround, it's a case of how much parts they've got. Are they using exactly the same parts as before, or have they had to make a compromise on a part that they maybe were running differently to Vegas? I just think he just doesn't look comfortable with his setup. He lost a lot of time, obviously, in FP2 because of the crash. There's just something about the way it is. We know that they've resurfaced the track in turn 1 or turn 2, so that should help it. But again, will that fix last a whole race? Would it be a problem? Is it just a confidence? Because obviously that's 2 races in a row now that he's had a problem in free practice.
Another point on that too. So my bold prediction this weekend was that there would be no DNFs, and that that little stretch between turn 2 and turn 3 with the bump sent 2 of the biggest crashes we've seen in a little while. They've flattened that surface a bit, Terry, but how confident would you be if you were me in that bold prediction based on the leveling of the surface and an incident-free FP3?
I wouldn't be that bold. I think that Abu Dhabi is known to throw something up. Even with the long runoffs, it's interesting that it's got one of the longest runoff areas, but actually brings out safety cars and crashes still quite often. So I'm not sure how good that prediction is, but it's a bold one. I'll certainly give you that one, Adam.
One thing I'd want to pick your brains on here, Terry, is AlphaTauri. Now, up until recently, they were at the forefront of our thinking for fantasy decisions, and certainly Tsunoda and Ricciardo have had some great weekends lately. Maybe Las Vegas was a bit of a red herring there, but there's talk again around particular upgrades they're bringing. It seems like they're just continuing to get as close to that Red Bull as possible. But interestingly, Ricciardo was P18 in free practice 3, Tsunoda P9, not too bad. But is there any kind of stance you have on whether or not they're expected to fare well? The race and qualifying sims looked a little interesting, but nothing out of the ordinary for me.
They've got a brand new floor. Obviously, the floor is one part you can't get from a competitor, so it's not a Red Bull floor. So it's one they've had to develop themselves. It's obviously being developed in line with next year, being in line with the new rear suspension package they're running from Red Bull. It's designed to literally create more downforce, more local downforce, to allow more adjustment on the rear wing on the ride height. So I think it's a good move. Whether or not it's going to be enough to bring them into play. In terms of the Williams look faster, especially Alex Albon does. Logan Sargent wasn't too far behind. But again, with Alex Albon at the top of his timing charts, you wonder what fuel load was being run. You wonder what engine settings were being run. I think that the Williams are going to drop down. Race pace, I'm expecting AlphaTauri might just get the jump on Williams still.
Okay.
I know it's not fantasy related, but one of the big questions this week was about the new name of the AlphaTauri. And as the car is getting closer and closer to the Red Bull, the name is getting closer and closer to the Red Bull. And I want to offer up my breakfast drink as a suggestion. Sugar-free Red Bull. Do you think that'll make it as the team in next year? Or do you think Racing Bulls is going to stick?
I think it'd be Racing Bull, but I think it'll be with a sponsor in the title as well. So I think it's designed deliberately for a title sponsor to come on board. We're hearing, I think it was Cash App, Visa, are 2 big names that have been linked. Certainly looks like it's going to maybe be a US company as well. So I think it's designed so that it will be something Racing Bulls rather than just Racing Bulls. So I think the logo's there. What we've seen, I think the name's there, but I firmly believe it's going to have a title sponsor in front of it before it comes to the grid next year.
I don't want to get too caught up on Red Bull for this weekend just because of how dominant we expect them to be every weekend. But do you think Max and Checo are going to remain front and center of the podium discussions? Do you think they are deservedly the favorites at a track like this? Obviously, Vegas suited their car characteristics, but Sergio looked a little bit further down the timing charts. What's your general consensus on Red Bull heading into the last week of the season?
I think Max there's something not right with his setup. We heard him on the radio, we heard him talking. We saw him change a lot of parts on that Red Bull in terms of front suspension, the rods going in, something which Red Bull don't normally do at all for a weekend. So that's a clear sign that something's not quite right for him. And the way he was certainly into turn 1 just wasn't generating enough heat into the tyres, wasn't generating enough heat into the brakes. So I think they've got a really strong pace, as they always do. I think they will be in the mix. But I do fancy maybe this is a weekend where one of the other teams may be able to get a bit of a jump on them, namely a McLaren, Ferrari, will be an outside best, but will have a pace after qualifying. And we've seen this from Red Bull before, where in free practice they haven't quite got it right. Then when it comes to qualifying themselves, they literally nail it and get it on.
It'll be interesting to see how this goes. Max is on 3 straight wins at this track, and it's certainly somewhere that he dominates at. But he did have those complaints earlier in the sessions about balance, and obviously he hasn't been at the top of the timesheet. So I would love to see another non-Red Bull winner. We had Sainz back in Singapore, but it'd be great to have more non-Red Bull winners.
Yeah, and I think I put that in the chat as my bold prediction that we're seeing on Red Bull winner this weekend.
I would love that. And One question I had looking at the bottom of the field, and this ties back to Rob's team from Vegas. He had Zhou Guanyu on his team, and when we flashed the qualifying predictions earlier, Alfa Romeo looked pretty high up there. They were P5 among the constructors, so bottom of the top 10 or so. What do you take of that? Is it something where they could qualify high and then not sustain it throughout the race, or does Alfa Romeo have something this weekend?
I personally think it's exactly that. I think when that pace, they'll be strong. And I think as we get into the race itself, they eat back and they get swallowed up by the other teams coming through and end up towards the back of the pack, to be honest. I think they get a good qualifying one, but not a good race pace from it. Yeah, they've struggled all year with their developments. They've struggled all year. There's obviously something with Alfa Romeo obviously pulling out after this race. I think there's been a lot of changes going behind the scene with Audi and retaining people, changing people direction of the team, how much investment's going in, and I think they're really struggling with it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for Alfa Romeo, because from a fantasy perspective, for instance, Joe has been a very popular pick, but you look at someone like Valtteri Bottas and he's not just really featured in the conversation whatsoever, partly because of the fact that he just doesn't seem to fit the price bracket that a lot of us are looking at, but also because he just hasn't looked like the Valtteri Bottas we saw at Mercedes, even last year, for instance. So I am curious heading into next year, how Alfa Romeo ultimately perform, but it has been a bit of a mixed season for them, especially when you put aside their fantasy potential.
Yeah, definitely.
Rob, I'm out of fantasy questions, but as a Mercedes fan and a Lewis fanboy, I've got to ask you, Terry, what is the latest on the Lewis reaching out to Red Bull or vice versa saga?
Joe, I think it's all a bit of a non-story. I mean, contract negotiations, you would naturally expect, drivers to be shopping around to see what's available. It's a pretty common thing. There would have been conversations had to see what was available, what seats might be coming up, whether or not there's a playoff somewhere. It's handy, one, to know where you're going, but two, also, if you need a negotiating tool, if you need to maybe drive your contract price higher, maybe, sort of say, I'm not a surefire bet to sign here. So I think it's all a bit of nothing. I think someone's definitely reached out. There's definitely been a conversation had somewhere. Whether or not that's been Lewis's dad, whether or not it's been Christian's representatives, who knows? I mean, I don't honestly believe we would ever see a team with a Max and Lewis in it. I don't think Red Bull would ever go down that route. So I think it was more of one of those conversations which says, my contract's coming up. Is there a seat available? Is there not? And that's kind of as far as it went. I certainly don't think there's any detail or anything which is other than that, really.
That's the sense I got too. It sounded like Lewis's team might have just been trying to drive his contract price up, and to not make Red Bull look like they were using them, you have to pretend to be serious enough to get a real answer from them. And I think that might have all just been taken out of proportion.
Yeah, and I think now they're just driving this sort of hunt of who said what, who did what. We saw all these news stories about Christian left messages, and it's all getting a bit ridiculous, really. I've got no doubt it was just literally a passing conversation from his representatives. Are you looking to renew? Check out, is there a possibility of a seat there or not?
And with such a slow news week, I think we just had to go with this tabloid material for the whole week, because there's not a whole lot to play for, not a whole lot of other driver news. There no remaining silly season discussions. So I think we just had to go with the tabloid fodder.
Yeah, I agree. We've only got Logan Sargent's seat is the only one not confirmed. So it's quite rare to go into the end of the season again with everything pretty much locked in and, all the changes decided. Most of the drivers staying where they are. There's not even controversy about drivers moving or anything. So it is slow from that point of view, that's for sure.
I'm really, really interested to see what 2024 looks like from a silly season point of view, because of how many contracts come up then. And I know, right, this season in particular hasn't been the most entertaining of driver merry-go-round, but next year it's going to be a barrel of laughs, and very excited to see who ends up where. Could be a very different grid in a couple of years' time.
It is. It's gonna have the domino effect, a bit like when we saw when Seb retired. As soon as that first one moves into place, that's going to be it. Then they're all going to fall. And I think you can tell from the drivers, everything's 1-year extensions. There's not a lot of long-term deals that have been happening, apart from obviously the top teams. So there's a lot of driver movement where they've typically held off, knowing that this market next year is going to be as good as a market for the drivers as well as the teams.
It's going to be the silliest season of all the silly seasons for sure.
Yeah.
Rob, do you have any other questions
Definitely.
for Terry before we start getting into lineup reviews?
No, I don't think so, Terry. You've obviously covered a lot of bases, not just in this particular show, but in the last few. And I've absolutely heeded your advice on more than one occasion. So, I don't have any questions for you now, but I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself and the rest of the community for all of the advice and input you provide the last few race weeks since joining the team.
I've really enjoyed it. Honestly, it's something a bit different. I'm even tempted to pick a fantasy Formula One team. I'm ashamed to say that I picked one at the beginning of the season. I haven't done anything with it. It's still sat there. I've probably got all these chips I can play before tomorrow. I might have to log in and see what it's doing before qualifying.
Maybe 2024 can be your ascension to the top spot.
Absolutely.
Well, especially now there's prizes on offer.
There'll be plenty for sure. Terry, thank you so much for joining, and thanks so much for your partnership in the second half of the year. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Now, let's move over to some of your lineup reviews. I can see them piling up in the FanAmp app. This first one is from a regular poster. This is Ziggy Jam. And you can see Ziggy's going with a top-heavy lineup here with Max, Charles, Lando, double AlphaTauri, Red Bull, McLaren. I think on the surface, I like the pivot back to Lando and McLaren. They're going to have a really wonderful week. And then I think we're going to see a lot of flavors of this. Do you go with Leclerc and Tsunoda, or someone cheaper like maybe Sainz and an upgrade from Tsunoda if you can reach all the way up to Fernando Alonso? But I'm fine with a top-heavy team because it worked well for us in Vegas.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I was certainly looking at Charles Leclerc heading into this last race week after such a stellar performance in Las Vegas. It is obviously with the double AlphaTauri something that I personally would always have reservations heading into any race week with the double up on. But at the same time, they have looked very good lately, and Tsunoda, as you've talked about on a number of occasions, is in just such a rich vein of form with that consistency. So if he can string together another weekend with a double-digit performance and Ricciardo can do his part, I definitely think Norris and Leclerc are the drivers to certainly rival Max for the top step.
Alligator in the chat asked if you had to pick one, Ricciardo or Tsunoda, who would you pick? I think Tsunoda has the higher upside of the two just because he's put together these 20, 30-point fantasy weeks, so he has it in him. But for Ricciardo, we talked back at our preview show on Tuesday about Ricciardo's strong history at this track. And with inferior teams, he's been nibbling around P9 to P12 these last 3 or 4 races at Abu Dhabi. And the last time we predicted that Ricciardo would perform well at a track that he's historically good at was Mexico, where he finished P7 again. So I wouldn't count Ricciardo out by any means if he was the guy you went with.
No, I really like both of them. Obviously budget dependent, but as you pointed out, Tsunoda has that kind of consistency we've seen lately. So very much a fan of his too. Before we get into the next team, I'll probably kill 2 birds with one stone with the messages in the chat. But I think someone, let me see if I can find the question. Simpsy Simon pointed out, what team would you like if you could use Limitless this weekend? I think it's got the makings of 5 slots on the screen here that are all kind of in my mind what it would come to a Limitless team. Obviously, you take away the AlphaTauris, I'd probably put in maybe Sainz or a Mercedes asset, but Max, Charles, Lando, Red Bull, and McLaren are probably the 5 out of the 7 slots covered. And you've also got in terms of autopilot 3 potential highest scorers this weekend too. So very much a team build that would cater towards Limitless and autopilot for this last week.
And I think the important thing for me, for the folks that have been asking, what team do I play with Limitless? I think McLaren is the right number 2 constructor. Even though there's budget on the table to go to a Ferrari or Mercedes, I think McLaren does have the highest upside of those constructors. So you don't necessarily have to max out your budget. Let's just go with whatever's the smartest. Don John in the chat asks, what about Perez? And you'll see in my lineup, I've got Checo running this week. I've got no problem running him as the P2 driver. I think a lot of folks are nervous just because Perez has 3 DNFs in his last 7 races, and he could limp out of this race. He's the only driver with multiple DNFs at Abu Dhabi in the last 5 years. So there are some reasons to be nervous, but also Red Bull are consistently fast. They're top in the qualifying sims. So I would have every confidence in Perez this week, and he'll be on my team too.
Definitely. I think Sector 2 in particular, with those 2 long DRS straights, are going to work in favor of Red Bull. I think if you're not so sure on Checo at that price point, there's also George Russell, there's also Carlos Sainz to entertain. So lots of optionality, but at the same time, it's quite ironic. A few weeks ago, we were so off Perez after doing us dirty on more than one occasion, but I think he has perhaps stepped back into I guess a level of consistency we saw from him earlier in the season. So for the last week, last race of the season, I think I'm in the same boat. I'm leaning towards Checo.
Let's head down to our next team here. This is a team with Max, Lando, George, Piastri, Ricardo, Red Bull, McLaren. Now, this is a really interesting 2X choice, which when I first looked at this, I wasn't totally sure. But if you go over to the updated Rider Sims after FP3, look who's common among these top 2X teams. It's Lando.
It is. Yeah, it's super interesting because obviously Lando is going to do... I expect Lando to do very well at Abu Dhabi. Do I expect him to win the race? Perhaps not. But he has those 3 driver of the days that we saw up until Las Vegas. Obviously a crowd favorite for a good reason. And perhaps that's factoring into the simulations because of, his, I guess, favoritism among the viewers. So if that's edging him across the line, then I think that's a very sound 2 times option. Not to mention the fact that I fully expect he is, just a consistent option. So, Max has had an impeccable record with DNFs. Maybe Lando got that out of his system last week, and Max is on course for a DNF this week. And if you're chasing rank in your mini leagues, I think you have to go differential on your 2 times this week too. So Lando, a great option there.
That's exactly what I was going to say. For teams like Rob or Luke or any of you that are trying to find that differential, this is one of the safest ones you have. You don't necessarily have to 2X Lance Stroll to have a differential here. Lando, with fastest lap and driver of the day, can finish P2, P3, and still outscore Max in the game and earn that 2X chip. So a really easy differential that you can play this week, and one that's supported by our good friends at F1 Fantasy Tools. Let's move down now to a double Ferrari, double AlphaTauri. I think for me, this has a little too much Ferrari exposure to me. And I know we're tempted after the good work they did at Las Vegas, but I would probably move either Sainz to Lando stands out the most to me, but maybe Leclerc to Checo if you think Sainz has something up his sleeve here.
Yeah, I completely agree with that point of view. It is a difficult one, I guess, because how am I going to articulate this properly? But I think in fantasy in particular, we've got Max and Red Bull, and you fully expect Max to carry the Red Bull points here. In I guess the case with Ferrari, if you expect Ferrari to do well, I'm of the view that you should just go for the constructor over a double driver lineup. And if you've got McLaren constructor, you probably expect that Lando would do well as a result of that. So what angle are you going for? Do you expect McLaren to do well, or do you expect Ferrari to do well? It's kind of maybe hedging your bets a little bit. And I understand that is the approach for a number of people in this last race of the season. But at the same time, I think if you're going McLaren constructor but double Ferrari, what's the expectation or the outcome that you're moving for in this particular situation? And I think Sainz is a good make way for Lando Norris, for instance, but I do like Charles Leclerc. He has had a couple of really good practice sessions, and on the back of a great week in Vegas, I think he can continue to deliver.
I totally agree with your point about it depending on what you're trying to get to this week. I think if you want an all-in approach, I would go triple McLaren here. If you want to have a heavy differential approach, maybe back out of Leclerc, get a cheaper driver, and then go to the Ferrari constructor and try to do something very different. But I think this lineup's a combination of safe and a little bit differential. I think it's going to be net neutral by the time it's all said and done. So The question in the chat, would you rather go with Sonoda, who we see on the screen here, or Lance Stroll? Rob, I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because Stroll has looked really good lately compared to some of the results we saw earlier this season. But for me, I think he has a history of just not qualifying very well. And I, with all due respect to his great drive last week, it was on the back of that first turn chaos where he was just able to slice through the field and capitalize on a number of drivers that spun out. So do I expect another 30+ point performance from Lance Stroll this weekend? Perhaps not. So for Sonoda, I think maybe Stroll has higher upside, but for Sonoda, I just like his consistency, and the simulations for AlphaTauri are also encouraging. So I think it may not be the most obvious pick, but I much prefer Sonoda for this weekend in particular.
For me, I'm actually going to disagree and go with Stroll. He's looked so good lately, partly because he qualifies so poorly, starting on the last row in 3 out of the last 4 races. I think that's been what's fueling his ascension up the grid. I don't predict a podium or anything for him, but I think a finish around P10, P11, moving up from a lower part of the grid, I think he has a higher upside than Sonoda this week, but I think it could be close. It's a good problem to have if you can afford both of them as your number 5 driver.
Definitely. Should we do 1 or 2 more questions in the chat and then jump to, or maybe we've got a few lineups as well, so we might have to rush through those quickly. Do you want to take care of? Actually, let's do 1 or 2 more lineups, then we can close out the chat and then move on to the last segment of the show.
This looks like someone with 2 chips left. And when in doubt, I would always go with the team on the right for Limitless. And that actually settles a few of the questions in the chat. If I had the ideal Limitless team, what would it look like? I would probably go with Max, Checo, Leclerc, Norris, and then whoever feels good as your last driver. If you think Sainz can rebound, go with Sainz. If you trust the free practice 3 result, go with Russell. I don't think there are too many bad answers for the number 5 spot. But then as a reminder from a point we made earlier, Red Bull, McLaren is your constructors. Don't feel like you have to use all the budget to go up to Mercedes or Ferrari if they're truly not the number 2 team. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, definitely. I think I really like the Limitless build. It's more, I think Russell is, if you want to get a piece of Mercedes, I think Hamilton over Russell for me is my pick. Yes, Russell obviously had a great free practice 3, or like just in general, a good free practice result. But Hamilton has been the more consistent driver this season, and I think is a little bit more of a differential as he's slightly more dear and probably won't be owned by that many people higher up the ranks. So for me, I think Hamilton's the asset for Mercedes to jump in on.
I like it. Let's lightning round these last 2. This lineup here looks perfectly fine to me, Joe. I would roll with the 3 times Red Bull and triple McLaren 2. And then, look who we have here. F1 Coffee Corner.
Look who it is.
Terry, he knows he's got all these chips. He's going with Limitless. And that's a perfectly fine lineup too. Going with
love it.
Double Mercedes and no Checo. He thinks Mercedes will take the fight to Ferrari for P2 in the constructors. Terry, I co-sign. That's a perfectly good lineup.
No, love it.
Let's move over to my team because I've got some decisions to make too. This is the team I rolled out for Vegas. And I'll tell you right now, Ferrari's got to go. I'm going to roll back into McLaren. And then I think I'm going to try to get as much McLaren coverage as possible, sliding into Lando and Oscar. Now, for me, this would give me a -4. I have the final fix in hand. And I think this is all going to work out for me. I have $2.9 million in budget left, which means I can move from Sergio to Charles. I could go from Lando to Sainz or Alonso. I can move from Piastri to Alonso, Danny Rick to any of the other budget drivers, up to Sonoda, maybe just before Sonoda. So it's a strong lineup with flexibility. I think I'm going to lock in the lineup we just saw a minute ago on our screens.
Yep, I fully agree. I am almost, unless something changes in the next 11 minutes, certain to go back to triple Red Bull, triple McLaren. What is this? Like race week 15 or something? It's back to a template build from what we saw in the kind of the first half of the second half of the season. So I think McLaren are an exceptional bet, and I'm running triple McLaren, triple Red Bull. I am toing and froing over Perez and Sainz for that particular slot, but I think I'll take Sergio's recent form, and that'll be enough for me. So it could be, I think if we go for the same team, I think you'll have me beat for this season.
We'll see. We'll see. You could pull something out on me in the last few minutes, or we could have. I'm on 6 straight DNFs, so I could just use a clean weekend. All right. We'll give the contest 2 more minutes left, and then let's lightning round some questions in the chat. So Don John says, Zhou over Hulk. And then what do you think about safety? I would say Zhou over Hulk if you were picking them as your number 5 driver this week. Zhou led all drivers in overtakes at Abu Dhabi last year. And this is a circuit that's now higher overtakes after some of the changes they made in 2021. So I would go with it. Safety, I've obviously made my bold prediction that there will be no retirements, but I think a lot of you have disagreed with me. So perhaps I was a little too bold. They flattened out that surface between turn 2 and turn 3 that caused the Hulk and Sainz incidents in FP2. But I think this track, as Terry mentioned earlier, usually does bring out the safety car once or twice. Yep. Definitely agree.
Why don't we quickly skim through the last few questions, and we'll get to the last part of the show. Ideal wildcard draft. I think you've got to have McLaren in there, at least Lando Norris and the constructor, in my opinion, Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing. I'd honestly say the teams we had on our screen, triple McLaren, triple Red Bull, is probably an ideal wildcard draft, and that's the team I've got for my wildcard this weekend, so I can't really disagree there. And then we'll go into Kana, Sainz and Tsunoda, into Leclerc and Ricciardo. Gives me a -4. Do you think that's worth it, Adam?
I think it's about the same. If Sainz can recover, if they can get the setup right after some of the issues he had in FP3, that first lineup will be good. But if not, if you want the safer route, I would say Leclerc and Ricciardo will be safer with the -4 safer. A couple questions earlier about folks that are 20, 30 points down in their league, considering the 2x on Norris. I think that's the play. If you're down about 30 points and you want to pick it up, Norris is a go big or go home that's safe and rider approved over on F1 Fantasy Tools.
Yep. Big fan of that.
All right. Let's get over to the contest, and then maybe we can pivot back over here in a minute and answer some final questions. Everybody who has submitted an answer to our contest is now on the wheel. Let's give it a spin. All right. The winner is Sophia. Congratulations, Sophia. You're going to win $50 to our sponsor over at Fifth Gear Garms. There are no more team names to change, but we'll be back with a contest very similar to this next year. So Rob and I are looking forward to all the fun and creative things you change our teams to.
Yep. Thank you for everyone who's participated in the giveaways this season. Obviously, a lot of deserving winners, but looking forward to being back next season with a few more, and hopefully some even more exciting, bigger prizes too. So again, been a great season of these Wheel of Names giveaways.
Mike in the chat says that I think he was just blowing really hard at his screen because he was about a millimeter away from winning. But Mike, we'll get you next year, I'm sure. Your ship will come in soon. Let's see. Okay, let's go back to the chat for maybe 2 more minutes and fire up some more questions, and then we'll bring Bruno and Luke back on. Are there any questions we missed? Alligator said, same team as Adam, but have budget for either Ricciardo or Tsunoda. I'd say Yuki.
Yep. That's my perspective. Arigato MF. Russell over Sainz. I think I'm going to go Sainz, but I wouldn't say that's going to be an absolute lock. I think George has looked competitive, but I do like the Ferrari's consistency lately. Sector 2 in particular, I think they'll look very good through. So for me, it's Russell. Sainz. What's your point of view there?
Can you say that question one more time? I got caught looking at the one at the bottom of the screen.
Russell or Carlos Sainz? Who's your pick between the two?
Russell.
It's not easy,
Signs.
is it?
I think
Yeah, I went
I'm
Sainz.
going to assume that Ferrari can fix the setup and that Sainz will recover. And then
Right.
Da asks in the chat, Albon and Ricardo or Stroll and Ricardo?
Albon and Ricardo, or Stroll and Ricardo. So it's really just Stroll versus Albon, right? I'm going to say Stroll. I don't think Williams are going to be very good, perhaps through Sector 2 because of that straight line speed. But I think Lance has enough in the tank to pull through. He might qualify probably lower than anticipated, but I definitely think a points finish is not out of range for someone like him.
I agree. I'm going to go with Stroll. He's had a really fantastic run of form the last few weeks. He's the top driver in that $11 to $16 million class, even outscoring Piastri. And his poor qualifying form stands to benefit him if he can last the whole race. Joel asks Stroll versus Gasly. Oh, now we're getting interesting.
Yeah, it's been I guess it's a dilemma that we've agonized over, not for our team specifically, but have talked about those kind of mid-priced options. Gasly, for me, I have a soft spot for, and he actually was my final pick for the last race of the season last year. I don't think he actually came through with much at all, but didn't DNF. I do think, even though they surprised us last week, the Alpines, Gasly in qualifying, Ocon in the race, I still think for me, I'm going to go for the last week of the season, a Gasly as a differential. So he's mine.
I think for those two, it's a toss-up for me. I don't think there's a wrong answer if you went with one or the other. Gasly has the higher race upside. Stroll might catch up just due to the overtake and positions gained upside. So it's just a matter of where you see them working. Reminder about Alpine is that they're using some of the experimental parts as they get ready for 2024. So it seemed to work well for them in Vegas, but will it carry over into this week, or are they going to try something else? That's the great unknown for them. A couple of questions in a row about Stroll versus Ocon. Ocon's been ill all weekend and also dealing with some of the experimental parts from Alpine. So even though Alpine have a really good car heading into the end of the season, I'm going to probably stick with Stroll. I think he might be safer. And then Ocon leads all drivers with DNFs. So I'd probably say Stroll.
Definitely love that pick too. All right, 3 minutes. Yeah, get those teams locked in. I think, Adam, you can take us away for the last couple of minutes of the show.
While our producer brings Bruno and Luke back in, I just wanted to give a big thanks to everybody. Thank you to FanAmp for taking a chance on us and putting on this wonderful show. Thank you to our guests this season, Bruno, Luke, F1 Coffee Corner. They've been fantastic and wonderful friends to us. And thank you to all of you for tuning into our Tuesday show and to this show. Rob and I we have that fire in our belly, and we want to come back stronger than ever next season and provide some great fantasy content for all of you. So thank you.
It's been a phenomenal season, and the community, I cannot say enough positive things about everyone out there who's engaged, who's replied, who's tweeted us, or even just joined the live stream. You might not be commenting in the chat, but even the viewership has been honestly such an impressive feat. So really excited for what 2024 has in store, because it's been above and beyond kind of what I expected heading into this season. So thanks to all of you watching and engaging.
Fantastic. Bruno and Luke, welcome back.
Hi.
We'll wait 2 minutes to get into the details of it, but have you selected your teams?
Yeah.
Or are you still up in the air?
I've already done it, yeah.
Fantastic. All right, good. Have you had a chance to follow along with the show? Were we helpful at all this week, or were you just head down looking at?
Yeah, I was listening along. Yeah.
Hopefully we answered some questions that will help you as you decide your teams.
Adam, have you locked your team in? I'm sure you have.
I've locked the team in with, I'm taking the -4, triple McLaren, triple Red Bull, Danny Rick. So I will give you that courtesy if you want to pivot in the last minute or so to get a differential on me. Go ahead.
No, I'm taking the same team. I've conceded defeat to you this season, but I think I'd much rather just preserve that top 5K.
I still have the final fix to screw this up, if that helps. I might talk myself into something stupid tonight, and then give you the win.
Fair enough.
Wonderful. How about this? In the last minute, let's just work out logistics. Luke and Bruno, do you want to share your lineups in the chat here or on Twitter as a picture so that I can share my screen?
I don't mind doing it on Twitter if you want.
Bruno, how
Do you
about you?
want I can reply to your tweets asking about lineups if you want.
Sure, go ahead. Bruno, what works for you? Oh, I think we don't have your audio, but I could see your lips say I'm good to do the same.
No, I think we've got Bruno on mute, perhaps.
Hey, that's okay. We'll keep an eye out. All right. So for those of you sticking around, we're working with Luke and Bruno to share their championship deciding teams. And now we're at the top of the hour. Lineups are locked. So I think we can get those in now.
There you go. I just tweeted them.
Let's see if I can find it. Rob, let me know if you can find it. Oh, there we go. Let's move this over to my screen share.
It's going to be the same team, isn't it?
And so here it is. It is the same team that I posted, but with the 2X on Lando. It's the differential that seems the safest and one that will, it's got the highest floor of any. So, Luke, good luck to you. That looks like a really solid team.
My logic behind it was that there's been so many times this season where I've had a decision before and I've changed it and I've sat here and gone, why didn't I pick the first thing I thought of? So I just thought for the final, why not just pick what I thought first? And then the differential side of it was Norris. I could have gotten some other drivers, but yeah, I just thought, why not?
And you've got the budget to go Sonoda over my Ricardo.
Yeah,
so
it's my exhausting budget completely.
Wonderful.
I've just seen Bruno's team on Twitter, Adam. I'm not sure if you can find it, but I'm interested to deliberate the two slightly different decisions these blokes have made.
Rob, did he post it as a reply to my tweet, or does he have it on his?
I think it's his own on his own page. Yeah.
All right. Let's head over there.
For everyone watching, be sure to follow these guys as well because they are excellent
one driver.
strategists.
So it all comes down to the Alpha Tauri and the 2X.
Wow.
So Yuki versus
Interesting.
Danny Rick, the 2X on Max versus Lando. It's all coming down to just the fine
laps.
margins.
Fine margins indeed.
Fantastic. Bruno and Luke, best of luck today. I'm pulling for both of you. I hope we see one of you in the winner's circle at the end of the day tomorrow. Good luck. Rob, any final thoughts before we close out our final live show of the season?
No, I've obviously already said it so far, but this season's been a blast, and to have guys like Bruno and Luke on the show, to do this with you, Adam, it's been an unbelievable season of fantasy. So and just F1 in general. So 2024 is going to be bigger and better than ever before.
Fantastic. Enjoy the race weekend, everybody. We'll be back with some off-season content soon. See ya.